The White House is facing growing pressure to take decisive action after Iran-backed militants killed 3 U.S. service members and injured at least 34 more in a weekend drone strike. That attack came on a small American outpost in northwestern Jordan, not far from the country's border with Iraq and Syria. And we're now learning that the enemy drone was mistaken for an American drone, allowing it to slip past the outpost air defenses. Our forces in the region have been targeted at least 160 times since mid-October. But now President Biden is vowing to respond. Hello, everyone. This is Outnumbered. I'm Kayleigh McEnany, here with my co-host Emily Campagno and Harris Faulkner. Also joining us, Fox News contributor and host of Tomi Lahren is Fearless on Outkick, Tomi Lahren, and Fox News contributor and senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, Mark Thiessen. But first, let's go live to Peter Doocy at the White House with more details. Peter.
Kayleigh, when President Biden says that the U.S. is going to respond at a time and manner of our choosing, that is something he's going to have to coordinate with the Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin, who we just heard from for the first time back at work since a few weeks of recovering from prostate cancer surgery.
Let me start with my outrage and sorrow for the death of 3 brave U.S. troops in Jordan and for the other troops who were wounded. The President and I will not tolerate attack on U.S. forces, and we will take all necessary actions to defend the U.S. and our troops.
Mitch McConnell has an idea about how to do that. He says our enemies are emboldened, and they will remain so until the United States imposes serious crippling costs, not only on frontline terrorist proxies, but on their Iranian sponsors who wear American blood as a badge of honor. John Cornyn, even more direct, he just posts, target Tehran. And we have no reason to think an attack against the Iranian homeland is coming. But administration officials tracking these attacks that are bankrolled by Iran are well aware they are becoming more dangerous.
I certainly can't deny the fact that there have been a series of attacks now increasingly lethal over weeks and months, which is why the president is going to be reviewing what the appropriate response is going forward.
And the fact this is happening today, January 29th, means that Iran is just ignoring President Biden's warnings on January 12th and on October 11th. And as Iran has acted up over this president's first term, he has said that the United States is prepared to defend its interests. But at the same time, he has also said that the United States does not want a conflict with Iran. Kayleigh?
Peter Doocy, thank you. Mark, so let's talk about President Biden's response. He has struck the Islamic resistance, which is the area we're talking about, the Iranian proxy, and the Houthis. I believe it's 8 and 9 times respectively. But a Politico piece took us inside his decision to strike the Houthis after they harassed U.S. ships, commercial ships, and something stood out to me in it. So Politico, inside Biden's decision to strike the Houthis, the Thursday strike, this was mid-January, ended weeks of growing pressure on Biden to respond militarily to Houthi attacks. The U.S. military had drawn up more forceful options. Listen to this, as early as the first week of December, but at this point, senior Biden officials agreed striking the Houthis directly was not the best course. The piece goes on to say, even when he ordered the strike, it took more than 7 days to get a plan of action deployed.
And at one point in one of the strikes, he warned them ahead of time so they wouldn't kill anybody, just to take out the missiles. I mean, this is such weakness. They first of all, treating the Houthis like they're an independent actor just shows complete incompetence. They are a wholly owned subsidiary of the Iranian regime. They would not be striking U.S. forces if it wasn't on direct orders from Tehran. So when Donald Trump was president, he drew a very clear red line. He said to the Iranian regime, if either you or your proxies kill a single American, we will not respond against your proxies. We will respond against Iran. And when they crossed that red line, he took out Qasem Soleimani, the terrorist mastermind of the Iranian regime. And guess what happened? Everyone's terrified that, we could get into a broader war. Peace broke out. The Iranians backed down, and he brokered not 1, not 2, not 3, 4 Arab-Israeli peace accords. Because the Iranian regime doesn't want to get into a war with the United States because they know they'd be crushed. They can't afford to get a war. So if you project strength and you impose a cost on the Iranians, you don't give them 160 tries, and then on the 161st, when they kill an American, then you go after the proxies. The first time they do it, you take a strike at Iran, and the message to Tehran should be, every time an American dies, Qasem Soleimani's successor dies too. And the most dangerous job in the world is to be Quds Force commander.
Yeah, well said. And I mean, Harris, as Keith Kellogg told me, my former colleague, he said, yes, it was killing Soleimani, but on top of that, we we publicly broadcast there are 52 Iranian targets. We back-channeled to the Swiss and said, guess who's next? Khomeini, the supreme leader.
For every one of the hostages that had been taken in 1979. He picked the number of targets and he tweeted it out. I've selected a number of targets for every one of the hostages you took in 1979.
And you know what that is? That is understanding that you can couple what your response is right back. You can retaliate, you know, an eye for an eye.
Yeah.
You can do that with that specificity and let your enemy know that I'm serious.
Yeah.
When you're arbitrary, I mean, try to teach a kid anything if you're arbitrary. You certainly can't potty train them. You got to have a plan. But I would say this takes me back to the time, the spring, right after Biden was in office, when we heard tale of troops along the border between Russia and Ukraine. And then by October of that year, we heard that there were north of 100,000 of them. And then by Christmas, we heard that there were 150,000 of them. And by February, what were they doing?
Yeah.
They were invading.
Yes.
Yeah. So, look, we can sit back and they can hit us 160 plus times since October 17th. We retaliate about 15 times or so, half measure. And now, as Jennifer Griffin reported to me last hour, oh, you know, there's an indication that they've turned the corner. But she reminded me, but Harris, it's all up to Biden. Yeah. So all the generals, everybody can give those plans that you're talking about, Kayleigh. But it's finally his decision. What will he choose? Remember Afghanistan? He was given a different way out. Which way did he choose?
Yeah, and his favorite word seems to be don't. It's a word that the Iranians don't seem to understand. It's not really a foreign policy philosophy or worldview, but here he goes. Let's watch him.
And what's the message to Iran?
Don't.
It was very important to send a very clear message to anyone who might seek to take advantage of the conflict in Gaza to threaten our personnel here or anywhere else in the region. Don't do it.
What is your message to Hezbollah and its backer, Iran?
Don't. Don't. I've already delivered the message to Iran. They know not to do anything.
Emily, so they don't understand the word don't, but they do understand the unfreezing of the $6 billion, the not enforcing the oil sanctions, the delisting of the Houthis. They understand those weak actions.
That's right. What they understand is that there is no deterrence whatsoever on the part of this administration. What they understand is that any message whatsoever coming from this administration, if it's anything less than abject weakness, that's what it means. The sad reality is that these deaths are the result of Biden's policies. They are the result of his fear of escalation. Every decision coming out of this administration is a fear of something, and it is a fear of escalation, and therefore there's no peace through strength. There's no message behind it of actual deterrence, and the reality is that he has been warned for quite some time that the inevitable would happen, and the inevitable was American deaths, and especially in the form of these drones that were mistaken for our own. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. I also agree with Senator Tom Cotton, who said the only answer to these attacks must be devastating military retaliation against Iran's terrorist forces. Anything less will confirm Joe Biden as a coward unworthy of being commander-in-chief. We have appeased Iran. We have capitulated to their demands. We have paid for all of this through back channels and upfront. There is zero, anything at all, any decision we've ever made that has put anything less than set the table for these horrific deaths. And when the president says, God bless our troops, or my heart is heavy, it means nothing to me.
Yeah, you know, Tommy, in life there is cause and there is effect. And I thought, how best can we illustrate this? So I asked for us to pull up these series of headlines. Look at this. UNRWA, that's the UN refugee body. United States announces restoration of U.S. $150 million to support Palestine refugees. That's under Biden. So they restored funding the Trump administration cut. Well, what happens? NPR, 12 UNRWA staff members are accused of involvement in Hamas attack against Israel. Despicable. Then you move on over to the Houthis. PBS, in foreign policy shift, Biden lifts terror designation for Houthis. Then what happens? Here we go. AP, Houthi rebels strike a U.S.-owned ship off the coast. Cause, effect, Biden is the connective tissue.
You'd think after the withdrawal from Afghanistan, the disastrous withdrawal, this administration would have learned their lesson, but they don't. And speaking of don't, that's all this president can say. Don't, and we shall respond. 3 U.S. service members lost their lives, their families grieving, and the most he can say is, we shall respond, or don't. He stands there in a cafe with a smoothie and says, don't. And that is supposed to give us comfort as Americans. That's supposed to give our allies comfort. No, it gives our enemies comfort. You know, to my Labradoodle, I say don't. And my Labradoodle has more respect for me than Iran has for Joe Biden. And my Labradoodle is going to do whatever he wants to do when I say don't, because he quite simply doesn't care. He wishes he could. But when Biden sits there and says don't, and then when we talk about Lloyd Austin and you talk about, oh, he's just now returned. Well, that's wonderful. We're all praying for his health. But I can't help but think, what if this had happened and we lost 3 service members a couple weeks ago when no one knew where he was? So it gives us no comfort. It gives our enemies a lot of comfort. And the most we hear from our president is don't.
Don't. And then this, Mark, I just want to throw this to you. We can't leave without this. This is a White House administration official. They do these background briefings at the White House with reporters. So this is January 12th, and here's what they had to say. In terms of consequences on Iran, we have a long-standing and deep pressure campaign that the United States has conducted. Do they have a long-standing and deep pressure campaign?
They do not. I mean, Trump did. They had only like $7 billion in assets when he left office, in state assets, and they're up in the tens of billions now, and that's the money they give to all the proxies. I mean, I think both Tommy and Harris hit it on the head. All these things are connected. It starts in Afghanistan. You project weakness in Afghanistan, that emboldens Putin to go into Ukraine. Then Biden refuses to give the Ukrainians the weapons they need to win. If he had given them everything that we're giving them now in the summer of 2022, they would have won the war by now when Russia was on its heels. Instead, he lets the Russians, he doesn't want to win, he just wants to not lose. And that sends a message to Iran, which then emboldens them and Hamas to carry out the attacks of October 7th. And then we don't do anything after 160 strikes, and finally they kill an American. It starts in Afghanistan, goes through Kyiv, goes to Tehran, goes to Hamas, goes to that base in Jordan. It's all
border crossers entering our nation every day illegally. President Biden is blaming Republicans for the sudden surge. Biden claims he would be able to, quote, shut down the border right now if only the GOP would pass his immigration bill. Republicans say that's not true. Here's Florida Governor Ron DeSantis.
This border deal is a farce. Joe Biden already has the authority to shut the border down. He could declare it a national emergency. He could stop the invasion cold if he wanted to. He does not want to. He wants to let people in. This so-called deal purports to give him tools so that he could actually close the border. The reality is it's green lighting up to 5,000 illegals every single day. That's 1.8 million plus over the course of a year, which they're codifying into law as saying that's an appropriate number of illegal entries. I think the appropriate number of illegal entries is 0, and our policy should reflect that.
Yeah, this sudden appetite to fix the border is so political by this president, and he could fix it by executive power.
Yeah, he did this with a pen. He could undo it with a pen. He chooses not to, just like Governor Ron DeSantis said there. But this is also important to note because we have an election coming up. Democrats want to have the appearance that they've done something without actually doing something. And they're able to do this if Republicans get on board with this border bill. Because if you go from 10,000 or 15,000 a day to 5,000, then you can stand on the podium or the lectern and you can say that you cut it in half and you're making great strides in progress towards securing the border. You're actually not, but it looks like it. And to your average viewer or voter out there, they'll say, you know what? It was a mess, but Biden is working on it, and the numbers are already down 50%. That is such a fantastic start.
So that is crazy and so true. You and I have been at the border when it was starting to get to 5,000 a day. 5,000 is a huge number, too. How do you think they got to that number?
Well, let's keep in mind that in the Obama days, 5,000 was a high. Now that's what we're willing to settle for, is 5,000 a day. That also doesn't include the gotaways, by the way. So that 5,000 number, already astronomical, already unacceptable, but that's not even the half of it.
So, Mark, what do you say to the critics on the left who say, well, Republicans just don't want to do a deal. They want to run on this. Trump is telling them they got to run on this, so on and so forth. Oh, you know, Biden's got to get this through right now.
Well, I don't think it has anything to do with the election. I think maybe for some it does, but I think they think it's a bad deal. You know, I mean, Republicans.
Even some of the Democrats?
I think the Republicans think that a lot of the Republicans think it's a bad deal for the reasons of Governor DeSantis raised. So if you think about this, Bill Malugin reported this weekend that there were 6,600 border crossings on Saturday, right? So that would have triggered this deal if it went into effect. It would have shut down the border. No asylum claims, no anything. Everybody gets thrown over there, and that's fine. That might have lasted for a long time. So it would actually have an impact on the border. But the problem is, Biden has broken the record every single year for the highest number of border crossings. Last year, it was an average of 6,767 a day. So that would trigger by this deal. The year before in 2022 is 6,493 a day. So that would have been triggered. So the border would be shut down on most days. But 2021, which was the all-time record in 2021, it was only 4,739 a day. So that would not shut down the border. That would be okay. So what this deal does is it codifies Biden's 2021 border disaster, as that's the new standard. That's okay. We consider that unacceptable until every year it got worse. So it's actually taking what Biden's least bad year, which was at that point the worst year in history, and making that the legislative standard for what's okay.
So, Emily, going forward with all of this, if this is going to be what Biden considers to be the new normal, how do we live with 4 more years?
We don't. I mean, I'm sorry. How do we live with the past 3? And to your point, building off of what you said, not only does the president want to make it appear as if he's doing something, but he also wants someone to blame. He wants to be able to blame the Republicans if the bill doesn't pass, or to say, I laid it out for you. Where were you when I needed you? The reality is that he signed 94 executive actions in the first 100 days, absolutely dismantling all of that President Trump had put into place to protect the border. So to DeSantis's point, it's all within his control. He could secure the border right now. It's within his purview, as the Supreme Court and other courts have formalized or confirmed. And secondly, he doesn't need the Republicans, but it's all going to be back on their messaging. So at the end of the day, we're still not going to win. It's still going to be, he has done nothing wrong. He's done everything right. And it was all the fault of the GOP and MAGA.
Yeah. You know, something that you said, though, Mark Antami, I should say this. When you consider the numbers that we've already dealt with, why can't a plan start there? And consider the fact that we might have to shut down the border for all the years equal to his presidency to get back to some sort of normalcy.
Yeah, you know, he's unwilling to implement the solution because he's in search of a talking point. And here's what I mean by that. The solution's very simple. He put forward 89 executive actions to roll back Trump's border policy in the first 100 days. You can undo all 89 of those. You don't need Congress. So they're in search of a talking point. And he tried out we wanted to put forward legislation, the GOP wouldn't let us. Well, you controlled Congress for 2 years, all Democrats, the Senate and the House. That talking point didn't work. So the new talking point he wants is the GOP rejected my deal. That's the talking point they want. They were floating, and I assume it's Democrat operatives who floated this polling to Politico Playbook this morning that showed 66% of the American public said they had serious concerns that the GOP is playing politics with the border. They think this will work. It will not work because everyone sees the lawlessness. Everyone knows who to blame. It's President Biden.
Well, just look at the populations in those 25 states that are standing with Texas right now. I mean, you've got half the country standing with Texas taking on the federal government over removing razor wire. I mean, whose side is the White House on?
Right.
They're certainly not uniting the country.
I wish we could see one courageous Democrat governor step up and say, I'm with the GOP on this, because it's crazy. Your political future's at risk.
All right, we'll move on.
Another embarrassing speech this past weekend. Just listen to this quip about former President Donald Trump.
American consumers are facing real confidence in our economy we're building. Let me tell you who else is noticing that. Donald Trump. Did you see what he recently said about that he wants to see the economy crash this year? A sitting president.
Sitting president. That's at least one reason why the president's re-election campaign needs help. SOS. So now the Biden camp is reportedly planning a first-of-its-kind major fundraiser with former Democratic presidents Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. But they're not the only prominent Democrats coming to Biden's aid. Gavin Newsom is on the stump desperately trying to sell Biden's record.
Because this race is started, and we need to lift up the issues, the successes, this extraordinary successes of the last 3 years, the Biden-Harris administration, and then we drive contrast. It's not even a complicated campaign. We have the receipts. We have the best 3-year record of any modern American presidency, period, full stop. And you look at the issue by issue, they poll overwhelmingly. American people support what Biden has done.
Except for the big thing, approval.
Yeah.
Biden's approval is historically low. Why is that?
Everybody's approval. Across the spectrum, you find exceptions to that. The economy is booming, inflation is cooling, and of course the economic strategies this president put together were all things Republicans dreamt of, but never delivered.
Mark, the fact check on that is longer than we have time for in this hour, but the reality is important, which is that he's a slick messenger. Yeah. And you couple that with the desperation of the Biden campaign. Will this be effective?
So it's not effective, but it's effective for Gavin Newsom, because Gavin Newsom's goal is to suck up to the Biden administration as much as he can, so that when Biden has a fall or something happens, he can step up and say, I was the loyal soldier defending the Biden record, and assume the mantle of the presidency. So that's great for Gavin Newsom. Nobody in America is buying that. Our Fox News poll showed that the number of Americans who think that Biden's policies, Bidenomics, have helped them in their lives is 14%. 14%. So that is not effective at all. Look, he is the most unpopular president in the history of presidential polling, going back to World War II and Harry Truman. He is underwater by double digits on every single issue that voters identify as important. 76% of Americans say he's too old for another term. 54% say he's not competent to carry out the job of the office. So his only game that he can play that's effective is MAGA, 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 because that worked for them in the last 2 elections, and they think it can work for another one.
Now, the cleaving section, Tommy, in addition to what Mark Thiessen said, there's the anti-Trump sort of, note that they're hitting. But the cleaving section is those far-left progressives that they thought that they could just woo by paying for student debt. Mm-hmm. The reality is they are fleeing. And so some argue, as are the moderates, that these big names, Clinton and Obama, are there to preserve the moderates, that they are there to cleave back those who are fleeing from the middle of the party.
Young people are hemorrhaging away from Joe Biden. Are they leaving the Democrat Party, though? This is what I've been saying, because I fear that we're looking at Biden's low approval rating and people not associating great things with Bidenomics, and we're putting it all and attaching it to Joe Biden. But as you mentioned, what if Joe Biden's not the nominee? What if it's Gavin Newsom? Then all of a sudden you put a brand new young face with nice hair on the Democrat platform, and then you bring in all of those people because you talk about Roe v. Wade and abortion, you talk about climate change, you talk about student loan forgiveness, and so then all of a sudden you woo all those people back in, and they've got the fundraising dollars for it. Biden, despite being unpopular, is still raking in a ton of money fundraising. So we have to be careful in getting overconfident and overly optimistic, because Biden very well could not be the nominee. And then what are we going to do if we base all of this around Joe?
You know where you're absolutely right about that? That's why you see Kamala Harris out there. And what's the number one talking point she has right now? Where they won last June, Roe versus Wade, abortion. Yeah. So it could be her. We don't know. But as Nikki Haley likes to say, a vote for Joe Biden is a vote for Kamala Harris eventually.
Mm-hmm. Kaylee, that recipe that Tommy laid out was impeccable, and it's also frightening. Will it work? And contrast that with the GOP strategy as we go into the election. The young people matter.
Yeah, let me just, if I could, go back to what Governor Gavin Newsom said, if you don't mind, because it's just astonishing. I just want to quote him again. We have the best 3-year record of any modern American presidency, period, full stop. Except no one agrees with you. The poll numbers, the average of Biden's poll numbers are as bad as Jimmy Carter. So the audacity of this guy to say that. But as I've said, this is all part of the delusion campaign. We will say it, and therefore it is true. Quentin Fulks, the deputy campaign manager, they bring up Biden's age to distract from the booming economy. Says no one ever except the Biden administration. And then Karine Jean-Pierre was asked about age by Peter Doocy. She wouldn't answer the question and instead engaged in ad hominem attacks against the reporter. So this is what they're going to do. But to add to your data, new Reuters data, 74% says Biden is too old. 3/4 of the country. So the question becomes, will those voters still vote for Joe Biden, hold their nose and vote for him nonetheless? I don't know.
Yeah.
So much to come, including this. Taylor Swift's stratospheric fame is...
She endorsed Mr. Biden in 2020, and last year, a single Instagram post of hers led to 35,000 new voter registrations. Fundraising appeals from Ms. Swift could be worth millions of dollars for Mr. Biden. So, Tommy, that's the New York Times. And while I know that Taylor Swift has endorsed before, you know, she has high favorables with a lot of different groups. I don't know what the incentive is for her to do this. I mean, as Michael Jordan said, Republicans buy sneakers, too.
Yeah, I think if she wanted to be protective over her legacy, she would stay out of politics. We know that she had the documentary. She went after my Senator Marsha Blackburn, so she delved into politics a little bit. It almost felt a little forced when she did it. I didn't necessarily feel like maybe she felt that with her heart and soul. But I think if she's smart, she will just stay out of politics altogether. She can encourage people to register to vote, which I think is great. I think we should all register to vote. But I think she should stop short of making an endorsement for Joe Biden or for Donald Trump. I mean, we would love to have it, but I think she should just stick to her singing and let her love life be what it is. And I think she should be protective over her legacy because there's a lot of young conservative families, young conservative girls that love Taylor Swift. Be protective over them, too.
I think it's very smart advice. I mean, Emily, so when she waded into politics before, Newsweek mentioned 2 endorsements she made against Marsha Blackburn, and then one of Jim Cooper. One of her endorsements was successful, the House race, but not in the Senate. Marsha Blackburn went on to be senator.
Well, all of this is so fascinating for its X's and O's. I really want to underscore what you said in the intro, that a single post of hers led to 35,000 new registrants. That's a whopping amount of power. That's arguably more power than the president. Does a president's post have that kind of impact? And remember in December when he swung through Southern California, his campaign, this is Biden, the president's campaign, carved out time to meet with influencers. He wanted to make sure that they knew exactly what they were posting, and that led to a bunch of TikToks. Has he gone to East Palestine yet? He hasn't. So this is a president who prioritizes and protects time with young, influential groups and TikTokers because that's important to him because of the harness attached to it. Taylor Swift's cat is valued, one of them is valued at $97 million because of its Instagram impact.
Her cat?
Her cat, because of its Instagram impact. And so this, it's like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. But the reality is, again, that's persuadable power. And this administration is locked, dead set on harnessing that. So when you put it against that landscape, I think the lesson here is that it matters. This administration knows it. It's sad that they prioritize that over average, normal Americans who need help that they've promised to visit, like, again, those in East Palestine. And also, GOP, get your act together. Do the same thing somehow. Get off TikTok, but
Snoop Dogg is now a fan of Donald Trump.
That's true. And Mark, they're looking at these numbers. The Biden campaign, this is USA Today's Suffolk poll, and you see Biden losing young voters 37-33 to former President Trump, and that mirrors the New York Times Siena poll, where Trump led by 7 points.
Yeah, no, exactly. So you've got, he's hemorrhaging young voters. Biden won young voters by 24 points in 2020, and now Trump is winning them by 7, according to the New York Times poll. So a lot of younger voters are looking at Biden saying, we are never, ever, ever getting back together.
Oh my God. Mark, remember when I made you like the resident e correspondent on our show because you're good at pop culture? Yes, you are. Proving that right. Harris.
I love that. I'm going to have a blank space and write in whose name? Yeah, okay. Probably not Biden's, I guess. I guess I don't know if her fans, and who knows how they will break in this way, but do you think everybody is political? Because I don't.
Yeah.
And I think that if you try, it's like Biden telling black voters over the weekend, you're the reason I won. No, the reason you won is because the Americans voted for you. Yeah. Blacks are running away from you faster than The young people are right now.
That's very true.
So I don't know if getting Taylor Swift involved, can she get the black vote too? Or are you going to go get Beyonce to do that? I mean,
NYPD also found 6 homemade ghost guns, including homemade AR-15 style assault weapons, including high-capacity magazines that were built using a 3D printer. We sat down with the inspector of the NYPD's Ghost Gun Division this morning, and they told us that ghost guns, they've retrieved 400 off the streets in the last year. That's up tenfold since 2019. And she says tracking down these untraceable ghost guns is now pivotal in helping them stop dangerous potential lone wolf extremists.
It's an alarming trend, and we are seeing a lot of chatter, in the extremist world, no matter what side of the extremist world that you're on, just a lot of chatter about the allure of these firearms, producing them, or being able to attain one.
And while prosecutors say there is no indication that these 2 brothers are part of a terrorist organization, we visited the Joint Operations Center of the NYPD this morning, and the Deputy Commissioner of Intelligence Counterterrorism tells us they are on heightened alert for domestic and foreign extremists.
What's different about the last few months is that we're dealing with an everywhere, all at once kind of a threat.
The brothers face up to 25 years in prison. They face 130 counts of criminal possession of weapons. Their next court date, Harris, is February 15th. Harris?
Brian, thank you very much. Well, when some of your friends come for you, oh boy, fellow allies of the district attorney, Fani Willis, want her to step away from the Trump election interference case in Georgia. Concerns are growing over her alleged love affair with Nathan Wade. The special prosecutor she hired to lead the case, one that's arguably the biggest of her career. Documents from Wade's divorce proceedings show Wade spent thousands of dollars on lavish vacations and even bought an airline ticket in Fani Willis's name. And this could all come up when Nathan Wade has to testify 2 days from now in his divorce case. Meanwhile, attorneys for former DOJ lawyer Jeffrey Clark are demanding that all communications between Fani Willis's team and the Biden administration be made public. They claim Wade and Willis had 2 separate meetings at the White House. And former